Okay, today it's pretty chilly out. It's like 26 degrees, and yesterday it was 50. I live in Maine, where the springtime in particular is pretty fickle, and so you can get one day you can get you know 3 inches of snow. The next it'll be 50 degrees, and the day after that it'll go back to like the 20s. So. Anyway, but it's sunny. That being said, it's definitely like a hang on to your hat kind of day. I've got my hat actually hanging on my favorite walking stick. So I'm out for a walk on a trail not far from where I live. I live in a pretty small city in Maine. So I was like, let's go on a walk. And so I grew up here, and one thing that if you're ever just kind of walking through the woods in Maine, that you'll probably notice is that we have all of these like dilapidated stone walls, just kind of randomly in the middle of the woods. And you might be thinking to yourself like, well, that's something that you typically see in like a field or something like that. And the reason that we have these is, well, there's a couple of reasons. We're gonna follow this one. So there's two reasons. So one of them, and I don't know if you can hear me super well over the wind. Anyway, one of the reasons is something called the Holocene Glacial Retreat, which was a geological event that began around 19,000 years ago. And what that was this giant glacier that covered most of North America, retreating northward, and what it did is it deposited all these rocks just kind of everywhere. And if you look around, you can see that we do have a lot of rocks in the woods up here. Maine has very in places it has very shallow, arid soil. It's not great for growing stuff. When European settlers arrived in the 17th and 18th centuries, they started clear cutting pretty much all the land with, beast of burden, oxen, draft horses. I can imagine this old dude being like, oh yeah, look at that one, she's a big one. Bring a sticker over there, property marker. And so they would till up these big rocks, and they would use them as property markers, and they would, basically barriers for animals and things like that. So by the end of the 18th century, early 19th century, about 75% of Maine and New England was clear-cut farmland. So that's why you see all these stone walls, right, in the woods. That was kind of weird. So around the War of 1812, though, there were these tariffs that were placed on British goods, because obviously the British were not being very nice to us at the time, and they were like, we gotta control trade with the British. So we slapped these tariffs on them, and at the time, one of the products that was in high demand was merino wool, and the British exported a lot of merino wool to us, and So with the tariffs in place, basically, it became financially unsustainable for a lot of people to have merino wool, and basically a deal was struck up with the Spanish that we would import these sheep to us, and that we would start raising these sheep ourselves, because it was way cheaper. It made a lot more financial sense to do that. And so there was this kind of craze in like the early 19th century, again after the War of 1812, of these merino sheep. Like everybody, it was basically like a cash crop. You know, everybody was like, oh, let's jump on board with this and start raising these sheep. So everybody and their uncle bought these sheep, and they started building these stone walls to keep them in place. And those sheep in particular really like kind of hilly terrain. So this Maine and New England in general was kind of like an ideal place to raise them. But gradually people were like, wow, time went on, and by, I think it was like the mid 19th century, people were like, wow, these tariffs don't work. And this is kind of a bonehead move, and we should maybe lift them. And basically all these protective tariffs were lifted on the British, and we started importing more merino wool. And the industry that had been built around these sheep, these guys, kind of munching on grass and everything, twigs, and sheep don't really eat. She don't really eat twigs. You know what I mean? They just munching. Kind of. The industry that had been built around these sheep was no longer really needed, and it died out. And so gradually, over time, a lot of the pastures that were used to raise these sheep ended up running to seed, and they turned back into forest. There's a lot of new growth here. That you don't see a lot of old growth, not like it used to be. So you can imagine that at one point this was all a glacier. This was all the Staven, like this huge glacier, really just like. And then after that, it was forest. And then after that, it was a field. One thing I really like about history is, history is just like, it's made up of, it's a process. It's like this ongoing thing, and it's not going to end until humanity does. And even after that, you have an unknown amount of time of kind of natural history. So history is really just a process, and it's a collection of people's actions and thoughts and feelings, and reacting to different things. It's kind of maybe a pretty I don't know if like distilled is the right word for it, but it's a very oversimplified way to see history. But I love history. That's the point. And so, if you think about history as a process, and you think about people as processes, or thinking about it as this sort of perpetual thing that doesn't end until we do. Basically, if people are processes, then it's kind of unfair to add any sort of like inert final like prognosis on the course of a life when it's not even done yet. And I take great comfort in knowing that everything is a process, even people. So obviously this is not everything that it once was. This is not a glacier. This is not a pasture filled with sheep. This is a new growth forest with lots of rocks in it. In the same way that you, whoever is watching this video, wherever you are, whatever language you speak, wherever you call home, whatever the weather is like today, you're not everything that you ever were, and you're not everything that you ever will be. But one thing's for certain: if you think of yourself as being a process, is that you're everything that you have been, and you're everything that you will have been. you can't view a life as, having this sort of home base to report back to, you know, and that the self and the current iteration of yourself is not necessarily beholden to a previous part of the process, but it's a result of the previous part of the process. And I think that's really beautiful. And I take, like I said, great comfort in knowing that things are not constant, and things may change for better or for worse. And that, you are a process and you're part of the process. Anyway, I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but yeah, I'm gonna walk back now. Be good.